lieu of music, just to read a little bit more about what Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg says about Mishna number 1 of Pirkei Avos. 2 centuries later, prayer was the central medium of communication with God. The divine presence was encountered everywhere in daily living. Home rituals, such as the reenactment of the Exodus at the Passover Seder, were universal. Torah study increased as the people became ever more active religiously. With the loss of the temple, ritual purification fell to the wayside, except in the area of relations between husband and wife. Something apt for reading in the 9 days. Hello, everybody. How are you? Whoa. Oops. There we go. Hello, everybody. How are you? Let's light up the darkness. Okay. There we go. Who is with us on a Thursday evening to open a new chapter in Tractate Kesubos? Chandora in the Bronx, Paula in Chicago, Melissa in Great Neck, Aoife in Florida, Sharon in New Jersey, Renee in Indiana, John in Maine, Tom in PA, James in Indianapolis. Aoife asks, are you fully recovered? God was just so kind to me that the COVID that I had last week, literally the only symptom that I had was I lost my sense of taste for a day. You know, I was very worried because a lot of people have lost that for an extended amount of time, but mine came back after a day. And I felt a little off, but so many people have had it so much worse. So thank you for asking. But really, it was just such a gentle case. I am vaxxed. I had one booster, so perhaps that really helped me. And so thank God I came out of my quarantine on Sunday. Thank you for asking. Cecil in Arizona, Bella in Florida, Stephen in New Hampshire, David in South Bend. We got audio, right? Anybody having a problem with audio, let me know. Hannah, can anyone else not hear? Hold on, double checking. The machine is telling me that I have audio. Hold on a second. Sounds like people can hear it. Okay, so hopefully the audio is not an issue. Probably you were talking about during the beginning where you would have expected to hear music and there was none. Okay, where am I? Cecil in Arizona, Bella in Florida, Stephen in New Hampshire, David in South Bend, Hannah asking if anyone else cannot hear. Hopefully you can hear now. Paul in the Great Northwest. Dawn is here. Jeannie has audio, thank God. Guy in Ohio. Christina says shalom. Sharon in Jupiter, Florida. Jeannie's in Denver. The Facebook audio is in and out. I don't know what's going on. And some people are having no problem with the audio. So if you're having trouble with the audio, you might want to go over on YouTube, Accidental Talmudist on YouTube. We're live over there, where we got Yitzhak in Kansas City. Hopefully it gets worked out. Okay. We are opening a new chapter today. We're in Tractate Kesubos, the 15th volume of the Talmud. These are generally speaking... Am I getting freezing? Come on, Facebook. Don't do this to us. It seems to be working, so hopefully it's okay. All right, Tractate Kesubos, the 15th volume of the Talmud. These are, generally speaking, the laws of marriage contracts, but as we've seen, there's other related matters. Chapter 2 was a lot about testimony, witness testimony, who is deemed credible, who is not. Here we're entering chapter 3. And so now that we've been talking about kind of marital laws and financial considerations, so we're going to start discussing the case of the rapist and the seducer. Now, as we enter this, it's important to notice that just like in other areas of law, sometimes the sages will be discussing a very specific aspect of the law, and they bring in a case as an example, and it doesn't mean that we're exhaustively studying that case. So, right now, we're not talking about what is the actual disposition, like how we dispose of a rapist. What actually happens when somebody is accused and convicted of rape, which is actually a death penalty offense under Jewish law. But what we're actually talking about is one aspect of it, right? Just one aspect of it in terms of a fine that may be owed to the young woman or to her father. It's not to say that that's the only aspect of the case. It's just that in this context, we're talking about that part of the law. Okay, so in the introduction to chapter 3 here in the Koran, and by the way, our daf today is page 29. Today's page is page 29 in Tractate Kesubos. So here in the introduction to chapter 3, we have the actual 2 verses from the Torah that are relevant. And if a man, this is Exodus 22, 15 and 16, and if a man seduce a virgin who was not betrothed, and he lies with her, he shall pay a dowry for her to be a wife to him. If her father refuses to give her to him, he shall weigh money like the dowry of the virgins. And from Deuteronomy 22, chapter 22, verses 28 and 29, if a man finds a young woman who is a virgin, who was not betrothed, and he lay hold on her and lie with her, meaning he raped her, and they be found, and the man who lay with her shall give to the father of the young woman 50 shekels of silver, and to him she shall be as a wife. Because he tormented her, he may not put her away all his days. Sometimes translated as, because he raped her, he may not divorce her forever. It's a patriarchal society where it's a unilateral right. Men can always divorce women unless it's a rapist, in which case she doesn't have to marry him, but she has the option to be supported by this man. And if she takes that option, he loses the right ever to divorce her, for this action that he may have done, just without thinking when he was a young idiot. And he will pay a price all of his days. Now, what we don't find in these discussions very often at all in the Talmud is imprisonment, right? Imprisonment was a very unusual type of punishment, and it actually had more to do with kind of foreign armies taking people captive or imprisoning them. But under Torah law, either it's the death penalty, or it's lashes, a person is flogged, or there's financial penalties. Now, another aspect of the financial penalties in this case of rape is he's going to have to pay her damages for physically damaging her if he does, her harm, if he actually does physical harm that wounds her, injures her, and pay damages for humiliation, right? So emotional trauma that he inflicts on her. But we're not dealing with that aspect of the law right now. We're just talking about it in terms of this payment of that's like a dowry in the case of the seducer and or the rapist. All right, now, page 29a at the top, Mishna number 1 of chapter 3. And as is so often the case with the sages, they don't jump in to talk about the simple cases of the law and then go to the more complex cases. It's sort of assumed that everyone in their, study group knew the simple cases, and so they jump right to the more complex cases. So Mishnah number 1, these are the cases of young women for whom there is a fine paid to their fathers by one who rapes them. One who engages in intercourse with a mamzeret, right? A woman who is a mamzer. Now, why are they just jumping to a case like this? Because there were 2 aspects of this particular aspect of the law that he has to marry her and pay a fine. But a Jewish man may not marry a Jewish woman who is a mamzer. So in this case, even though he cannot marry her and fulfill that part of the punishment, he still pays the fine. right? That's why these cases are being discussed at the top of Mishnah number 1. Moreover, when we say the word young women, that's actually a specific legal state in the sort of development of a woman. Until she hits puberty, she's a minor. Then when she first hits puberty and for the next 6 months, she's considered a young woman. So it's a very specific period in her life. And then after those 6 months, she's an adult woman. So here they're actually talking about that in-between stage when she just hits puberty and for the next 6 months. That's called a young woman in this translation. So these are the cases of young women for whom there is a fine paid to their fathers, right? Once she's a full adult, the fine would go to her, not to her father. When she's a minor, the fine for sure goes to her father. Why in that in-between stage would the fine go to her father and not to her? Because the father still has some authority over his daughter. In the ancient world, until she hits puberty, when she's fully under the father's control, he had a right that, God willing, few fathers exercised, but he had a right to sell her to be a slave, to another family. And tragically, some poor families would do that. Once she's an adult, he certainly does not have the right to do that. And when she's in that in-between stage, he has some authority over her, but not other kinds of authority. Can he sell her as a slave? Probably not. Can he betroth her to another man, from another family? Certainly he can do that when she's a minor. When she's in that in-between stage, not exactly. All right. So during this stage, young women for whom there is a fine paid to their fathers by the one who rapes them, one who engages in intercourse with a mamzeret or with a Gibeonite woman, who are given to the service of the people and the altar. We learned about them in Joshua 9:27, or with a Samaritan woman. Who were the Samaritans. Recall that when the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom of Israel were exiled during the first temple period, right, often spoken about as the lost tribes of Israel, when the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom, and all the Jews from the northern kingdom were exiled to other lands, and many of them were lost and never returned. The land was then left barren, so the Assyrians resettled the land with these other people, the Samaritans. They weren't Jews, but once they were living in the land of Israel, the Bible tells us they were attacked by lions because God had decreed that only Jews would live in the land at that time, and these Samaritans felt that their lives were endangered if they were not Jews when they were living in the Jewish land. So they converted to Judaism, but it was understood as not a complete conversion because it was coerced. They felt that their lives were in danger if they didn't convert. So some of the sages hold that conversion to be a real and authentic conversion, and other sages don't. The ones that say it was a conversion acknowledge that it was coerced, but that later they sort of lived as Jews for long enough that they were considered Jews. But they always had this very questionable relationship with Jewish law because they only accepted the written Torah and not the authority of the sages and the oral Torah tradition. And so that's why the sages, had a whole body of law about whether Jews can marry Samaritans or not, whether we can sell produce or buy wine from Samaritans or not. We encounter those kinds of questions very often in the Talmud. Again, the Talmud will always spend more time on the unusual liminal cases because the law is more interesting there. It doesn't matter that they rarely occur in the regular world because the clear cases don't make for interesting Talmudic debate. And so that's why they spend more time on things even though they come up rarely. In addition, the same applies to one who engages in intercourse with a female convert, with a captive woman, or with a maidservant, provided that the captives were ransomed, or that the converts converted, or that the maidservants were liberated when they were less than 3 years old, 3 years and 1 day old, as only in that case do they maintain the presumptive status of a virgin. This law is keyed on whether the girl is a virgin or not, and certain people don't have the presumptive legal status of a virgin. Then we also have a note here. Where is it? Yeah, so I'm not going to read that because I already mentioned it. Okay, that's the beginning of the Mishnah. Second part of the Mishnah. Similarly, one who engages in intercourse with his sister, i.e. he rapes her, or with his father's sister, or with his mother's sister, or with his wife's sister, or with his brother's wife, or with his father's brother's wife, after they were divorced. Why after they were divorced? Because if you have intercourse with somebody's wife, meaning with a married woman, now you've committed adultery and it's a death penalty offense rather than something that's going to be worked out with a fine. Okay, so if he did that with any of these people, similarly, one who engages in intercourse with his sister, his father's sister, his mother's sister, or his wife's sister, or with his brother's wife, or with his father's brother's wife after they were divorced, or with a menstruating woman, in all these cases, he pays the fine. Although there is charis, right, death at the hands of the heavenly court, for engaging in relations with any of the women enumerated in this list in the second paragraph of the Mishnah, one is still liable to pay the fine because there is no court-imposed capital punishment. If she was married, then there would be capital punishment. In cases where there is a court-imposed death penalty, the rapist would be exempt from paying the fine. He doesn't pay the fine, he's executed. Right? So they're going to make a distinction about which punishment will apply. But the point is here that in all these cases, he may not marry the woman, right? The simple case is that he raped or seduced a virgin. Now he has to marry her and pay the fine, and he may never divorce her. But if it's illegal for him to marry her, because there's various other prohibitions at work, that doesn't mean even so now the punishment was marry her and pay the fine. If we take marriage off the table because it's illegal to marry her, that we still leave the fine on the table. He pays the fine. He's not excused from paying the fine just because he's not able to marry her legally. Now the Gemara. The Gemara wonders, is it these young women with flawed lineage listed in the Mishnah, like the mamzer, for whom there is a fine paid if they are raped, while for young women with unflawed lineage, no, there is no fine? And so the Gemara is actually asking, why did you start with these tough cases? Are you saying that in the normal case, you don't pay the fine? And the Gemara explains that this is what the Tana, the rabbi of the Mishnah, is saying. These are the young women with flawed lineage for whom there is a fine paid if they are raped. This is not a comprehensive list. Rather, the rabbi of the Mishnah enumerates these particular young women for whom a fine is paid even though they have flawed lineage, which takes marriage to them off the table. One who has relations with a mamzeret or with a Gibeonite woman or with a Samaritan woman. You may not marry them, but if you rape them, you must pay the fine. So the Mishnah teaches the law with regard to a young woman from whom the young woman, right, meaning in that in-between stage, she started puberty, but she's not a full adult yet, from which the Gemara infers with regard to a young woman, yes, one is liable to pay the fine if he rapes her, but with regard to a minor, no, one is not liable to pay the fine. Who is the Tana who maintains that one is liable for raping a young woman, but not a minor? That is not how the law works out, but let's continue. He's going to pay the fine. Who's he paying it to? Her or her father? Right? Rabbi Yehuda said that Rav said, the Tana is Rabbi Meir, as it is taught in a Baraisa, with regard to a minor from the age of 1 day old until she grows 2 pubic hairs, meaning she begins puberty, there is the possibility of sale for her, as her father may sell her as a Hebrew maidservant. But there is no fine paid for her if she is raped, according to Rabbi Meir. And once she grows 2 pubic hairs, from that point on until she matures into a grown woman, there is a fine for her, as during that period she is a young woman, with regard to whom the Torah law of a rapist and a seducer applies, but there is no possibility of her father selling her as a maidservant. And once she grows 2 hairs, she is no longer under her father's control and can no longer be sold. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. As Rabbi Meir would state a principle, any place where there is a sale, there is no fine, and any place where there is a fine, there is no sale. And the rabbis say, the majority who disagree with Rabbi Meir, with regard to a minor from the age of 3 years and 1 day old until she matures into a grown woman, There is a fine for her. And the Gemara asks, is that to say that a fine, yes, there is, but a sale, no, there is not? Do the rabbis maintain that the father has no right to sell his minor daughter? And the Gemara amends the text to say, there is a fine, even in a place where there is a sale. That is, not only can a minor girl from the age of 3 be sold until she matures, but she also receives payment of the fine. Now we're on page 29b. The Gemara questions the basic law that one who rapes young women of flawed lineage, like the mamzeret, is liable to pay the fine. And are these young women entitled to the fine? But why? I read here with regard to a rapist, and to him she shall be as a wife. Deuteronomy 22:29, from which the sages derived that only a wife who is suitable for him is eligible to receive payment of a fine from a rapist. Reish Lakish said that one verse states, if a man finds a young woman, Deuteronomy 22:28, and another states, and he shall give to the father of the young woman, Deuteronomy 22:29, this is tantamount to 3 mentions, young woman, the young woman. As the superfluous definite article, which was not necessary, is interpreted by the sages as a 3rd mention of the term. So one mention of young woman is required to teach the matter itself, that one who rapes her is liable to pay a fine. And the 2nd mention is there to include payment of a fine to those young women for whose rape one is liable for violating prohibitions, meaning just by being with her, he's violating a prohibition aside from the fact that he raped her. And the 3rd mention is to include payment of a fine to those young women for whose rape one is liable to receive karas. Not only did he violate a prohibition in being with this woman, but a strong prohibition, like his father's wife or his brother's sister, his brother's wife, something like that. So Rav Papa said, this is derived from the law of the seducer. As the verse states, and if a man seduce a virgin, he shall weigh money like the dowry of the virgins. And this is tantamount to 3 mentions, virgin, virgins, the virgins. One mention is required to teach the matter itself, and one to include those young women for whom sleeping with them violates a prohibition, and the 3rd to include young women with whom sleeping with them violates a strong prohibition that results in a karas penalty. So the Gemara asks, and Rav Papa, what is the reason that he did not cite the source as Reish Lakish did? And the Gemara answers, that derivation from the 3 instances of the term young woman is required by him to teach in accordance with that law which Abaye stated. As Abaye said, if one engaged in forced intercourse, if one raped a young woman, and she died before he stood trial, he is exempt from paying the fine, as it is stated, and he shall give to the father of the young woman. From the fact that the verse does not simply say to the father, it is inferred to the father of the young woman and not to the father of a dead woman. He is liable only if the young woman is still alive. Now, if his rape resulted in her death, he's guilty of murder and he will be executed for that, but he doesn't also pay the fine to her father. The Gemara asks, and Reish Lakish, what is the reason that he did not cite the source as Rav Papa did? And the Gemara answers, that derivation from 3 instances of the term virgin is required by him to derive a verbal analogy, as it is taught in a Baraisa that it is written with regard to the seducer, he shall weigh, yishkol, money like the dowry of the virgins. That's Exodus 22:16, from which it is derived that this fine of a seducer should be a sum of 50 selah, like the dowry of the virgins specified in the case of a rapist. And the dowry of the virgins must be paid in selah, like this fine of the seducer. Therefore, Reish Lakish holds that no additional matters may be learned from the term virgins. And the Gemara asks, and for Reish Lakish too, isn't it required by him to teach in accordance with that which Abaye said? And similarly for Rav Papa, isn't it required by him to derive a verbal analogy? Rather, there are 6 verses written, and both Reish Lakish and Rav Papa derive matters from all of them. In the 2 passages discussing the rapist and the seducer, it is written, young woman, the young woman, virgin, virgins, the virgins. Two mentions are required to teach the matters themselves, the basic laws of a rapist and a seducer. One mention is needed to teach in accordance with that which Abaye said, and one mention is necessary to derive a verbal analogy with regard to the dowry of virgins. Two mentions of the term remain for him. One is to include the young women whose rape he is liable to violating prohibitions, and the other is to include those young women for whose rape he is liable to receive karas. Reish Lakish and Rav Papa therefore do not disagree, but the derivation of each that they made of these laws complements the other. The Gemara comments, and the Mishnah comes to exclude the opinion of this Tana, as it is taught in a Baraisa that it is written, and to him she shall be, tihiyeh, as a wife. And Shimon Hatimni says, this is referring to a woman for whom there is betrothal, havaya. If one betroths a woman with whom relations are punishable by karas, the betrothal does not take effect. And Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh says, this is referring to a woman who is suitable for him to sustain, whom he need not divorce due to her flawed lineage. In other words, if you betroth a woman who is a mamzer and she's prohibited to you, so the betrothal didn't take effect, according to one opinion. Others say the betrothal did take effect. You're not permitted to marry her, but now that you betrothed her, you have to give her a bill of divorce. And where it's permitted to sustain her, even though it's illegal to marry her, like that's a priest who marries a divorcee. Now, we're going to force him to divorce her if he's going to keep serving in the temple. We might put pressure on him to divorce her because he shouldn't be married to a divorcee. But the marriage is still a marriage. And while he's married to her, he has all the obligations toward her that any husband has. Whereas that's a priest and a divorcee. Whereas a Jew and a mamzer, it's such a strong prohibition on that we force them to divorce, no question. So the Gemara begins its analysis of the Baraisa with the question, what is the practical difference between the statements of Shimon Hatimni and Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh? And the Gemara explains that Rabbi Zera said, the difference between their opinions is with regard to a mamzeret, or a Gibeonite woman, or any other woman who is forbidden. He can't be married to her, but if he betroths her, the betrothal takes effect. In other words, something happened when he betroths her. He can't go ahead and marry her, but he's going to have to give her a bill of divorce, in order to end the betrothal. Whereas a different opinion would be, if you're not allowed to be married to her, when you betrothed her, you did nothing at all. The betrothal is meaningless, and so you don't need a get to undo that betrothal. So according to the one who said that the criterion is whether there is betrothal, so for this woman there is also betrothal. If a Jewish man betroths a mamzeret, or a Gibeonite woman, although it is prohibited to do so, the betrothal takes effect. However, according to the one who said that the criterion is whether the woman is suitable for him to sustain, this woman is not suitable for him to sustain, since due to the prohibition he is obligated to divorce her. And the Gemara asks, and according to Rabbi Akiva, who said betrothal does not take effect for women for whose rape one is liable for violating prohibitions, what is the difference between them? According to his opinion, betrothal of a mamzeret does not take effect either. And the Gemara answers, the difference between their statements is like the case of a widow raped by a high priest, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Simai. As it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Simai says, Rabbi Akiva deems children from all illicit relations mamzerim. Right? So normally a mamzer is only a married woman, a Jewish woman who's married to a Jewish man, and she has sex with a Jewish man who's not her husband and gets pregnant. So the child of that union is a mamzer. They committed adultery. They actually committed a death penalty offense. The death penalty might not be enforced against them, but the child is a mamzer. No Jew is permitted to marry a mamzer except another mamzer. So that's normally the definition of a mamzer. But Rabbi Akiva is more hardcore, more stringent, and he says anytime a Jewish man, produces offspring with a Jewish woman who is prohibited to him, even if the prohibition does not stem from the fact that she's married to someone else, According to Rabbi Akiva, they made a mamzer. The only exception to that is when a high priest, marries or has sex with a widow. That definitely, the offspring of that union is a halal, just like the offspring of a rabbi and of a priest and a divorced woman. But it's not a mamzer, right? Even according to Rabbi Akiva. That the child of a priest and a divorced woman is disqualified from serving as a priest, but he's not a mamzer. Rabbi Akiva would say the child of a priest and a divorced woman is a mamzer. That's a minority opinion that the law does not follow. So Rabbi Simai says, Rabbi Akiva deems children from all illicit relations mamzerim, except for a child born from a widow to a high priest. As the Torah said, a widow and a divorcee he shall not take, and he shall not profane his seed among his people, from which it is derived, if he has a child with a widow, he creates chilulin, i.e. the male offspring of those relations is a halal, disqualified from the priesthood, and the female offspring is a halala, unfit to marry a priest, but he does not create a mamzer. Apparently, in that case, the betrothal does take effect. So the Gemara asks, and according to Rabbi Yeshivav, who said, come, let us scream at Akiva ben Yosef, at Rabbi Akiva, who is proliferating mamzerim, as he would say with regard to anyone who does not have the possibility of permitted relations in the Jewish people, including a widow with a high priest. The offspring is a mamzer. What is the difference between their opinions, between the one who said that a fine is paid to women with whom the betrothal takes effect, and the one who said that a fine is paid to women suitable for one to sustain? Rabbi Yeshavav maintains that betrothal does not take effect even in the case of a widow to a high priest. And the Gemara answers there is a difference between them with regard to intercourse with women, for which one is liable for violating a positive mitzvah. For example, an Egyptian convert and an Edomite convert. If he raped a first or second generation Egyptian or Edomite convert, even Rabbi Yeshavav agrees that the child is not a mamzer as the betrothal takes effect. On the other hand, it is prohibited for him to sustain her as a wife. We're on page 30a. I'm just going to read a couple more paragraphs to get a little bit of a jump on tomorrow's page, because tomorrow, Friday, Friday regular time, noon Pacific, we're going to do a double daf with God's help, because there's no class Saturday night or Sunday, right? Tisha B'Av, the fast of Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av falls on Shabbos this year, but the fast of Tisha B'Av is observed Saturday night and all day Sunday. And during that period, we don't engage in Torah study. So we won't be having our class neither Saturday night nor Sunday. So I'm planning to do a double page tomorrow, Friday, and a double page on Monday, and that will get us caught up and on schedule. So just to finish today's reading, so the Gemara asks, this works out well according to Rabbi Yeshavav, if he is coming to reject the opinion of Rabbi Simai. If Rabbi Yeshavav merely takes issue with Rabbi Simai, who said that all offspring of forbidden relations are mamzerim, according to Rabbi Akiva, except for those resulting from relations between a widow and a high priest, then it may well be explained that Rabbi Yeshivav holds that Rabbi Akiva rules that betrothal does not take effect, and there is mamzerus when one violates the prohibitions of the priesthood. However, if he is stating his own opinion, independent of Rabbi Simai's statement, his ruling is more comprehensive and leads to the conclusion that in the case of relations with anyone who does not have the possibility of permitted relations among the Jewish people, that the child is a mamzer, like Rabbi Akiva would hold. And this is true even of women for relations with whom one is liable for violating a positive commandment, like the Egyptian or Edomite converts. In that case, what is the difference between the opinions of Shimon HaTimni and Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe? And the Gemara answers, there is a difference between them in the case of a non-virgin raped by a high priest. And the Gemara asks here too, she is a woman for relations with whom one is liable for violating a positive mitzvah, as the high priest fails to fulfill the mitzvah, but a virgin of his own people shall he take to a wife. It's not just you shall not rape a woman, that's the negative commandment, but also a high priest shall marry a virgin. Since he violated both of those, we have this question. If Rabbi Akiva rules that betrothal does not take effect when a positive mitzvah is violated, what is different about this case? And the Gemara answers it is different because it is a positive mitzvah whose application is not equal for all. There are two lenient aspects to this mitzvah. It is a positive mitzvah and not a prohibition, and it applies only to the high priest and not to all Jews. So even Rabbi Yeshivav would agree that according to Rabbi Akiva, a child born from relations between a high priest and a non-virgin is not a mamzer. However, the high priest may not sustain the woman as his wife. Therefore, this case is the practical difference between the statements of Shimon Hatimni and Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya. As you can see, we kind of wandered off a little bit into the weeds. The general principle we're exploring from our Mishna is, in these cases where a man rapes a woman, whether or not he's going to be subject to the death penalty, whether or not he's going to be liable for damages for humiliation or pain and suffering. We're only looking at the question of the Torah-dictated punishment or fine that he has to pay her father if she's a young woman, or her if she's a full-grown woman, for the fact that he did this, and he has to marry her. But if he cannot marry her, then what? That's what we began to examine, and that's how we got into, well, who is a mamzer and who is not. Okay, let's check out questions or comments on page 29, right? Our daf today is page 29. That's the page we are doing. Okay. Looks like only one question from Tom. Was marriage treated almost as the father selling his daughter to the man who would be her husband? Yes, if he betrothed her while she was still under his authority. Right, so what's interesting about Jewish law and how it's so different than what we're kind of accustomed to living in modern culture. We know that a girl has a bat mitzvah when she's 12 and she's considered a legal adult. But, we don't send a girl, let's say she's 12 and a half, out into the world. Hey, go earn a living, buy yourself a house and a car. You're on your own. But after she's 12 and a half, right, hits puberty plus 6 more months, she's an adult. And when she's an adult, the father may not marry her off against her will. But when she's a minor, right, and we also don't have slavery anymore. But in ancient times, he could sell her as a slave, a Hebrew slave, so it would not be a lifetime enslavement, but it could be a 6 years of enslavement. And he could also betroth her, even against her will, to a man from another family, like the fathers would get together and arrange the marriage of their children. And he had the right to betroth her. But once she's an adult, he does not have that right. Then she betroths herself. And then there's that liminal period when she's a young woman, has hit puberty, has not become a fully, independent adult woman, where these laws, where it's questionable what the outcome is, and that's why the sages are examining that period. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Friday, the regular Friday time, noon Pacific. And with God's help, we'll do pages 30 and 31. Then no class Saturday, no class Sunday, and we'll meet again on Monday to do pages 32 and 33, and that would put us back on the Daf Yomi schedule. Have a great night.